Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 20 of And Action Filmmaking Podcast. I'm Tommy DiNucci. I'm here, as always, with Mike Messier. And this week we have a very interesting and exciting and really inspiring topic. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about a documentary called Man in Red Bandana. But before we get into that, Mike, how the hell are you?
I'm good, Tommy. It's good to be here. Had another good week, and seems like a long summer here in Florida this year, but that's okay. And this is a very fascinating topic. I just rewatched the documentary Man in Red Bandana. It's available on Amazon Prime Video for free if anyone wants to watch it on that venue. There's also a ESPN uh, kind of coverage of this story, like a 11-minute ESPN story. But if you want the full story, you got to watch the doc, which I'm glad that I saw it initially 3 or 4 years ago and just yesterday morning.
Yeah, we're excited to be talking about the film directed by Matthew Weiss, Man in Red Bandana. It's kind of funny, fate's a weird thing. Maybe it's fate, maybe it's coincidence. But here in the Northeast, particularly in Rhode Island, we had a treacherous rainstorm yesterday. I'm talking, it was bad. Like in my city, we had 7 inches of rainfall yesterday, and it fell quick, and it caused flooding all up and down the highways, and people were legit stranded in their cars for hours, and it was a big problem. Luckily, I don't think anyone got seriously hurt, but as a result of that flood, Sam Eilertson, who we're going to talk about on this show, who's a longtime collaborator of mine, he's done everything from work as a cinematographer, which is really his kind of main area of expertise, but he's also a terrific editor, kind of a whiz, a jack of all trades in the world of film from a technical standpoint. Sam gives me a call yesterday. I'm about to crack into some writing, and I love writing in the rain. That's like my best time to write. When I almost always listen to music when I write, but when it's raining, I'll actually turn the music off, and the music's kind of like my own form of mysterious music.
Symphony of creativity.
Yeah, I love it. So I was in all my glory yesterday. It's raining. It's beautiful. It's tranquil. I'm about to write kick some serious pages asses. And I get a phone call from Sam, and he's stranded. He was in Warwick, which is the town over, and he was at the rock gym climbing, and he had no choice but to ask if he could take shelter at my house because he literally could not get on the highway and get back to Providence. So Sam came over, and sure enough, we sit down and we start chatting and catch up. I haven't seen Sam in a little while, and I start talking about Man in Red Bandana because Sam was very instrumental in the process. Sam edited the film and was kind of riding shotgun throughout that whole process. So it was fun to get a chance to, here's a guy who I haven't seen since I think I saw Sam over the summer, maybe like in June. We worked together on the set of the movie Junction. So here's a guy I haven't seen in a couple months. And Sam and I are very close, but we don't talk every day. It's not that kind of a thing. I haven't seen him in a while, and he happens to come over yesterday, and I could really pick his brain and reminisce on Man in Red Bandana. I was like, hey man, we're doing Man in Red Bandana on the podcast tomorrow. So it was great. It was great timing. Sometimes, the rain sent me a little Sam Eilertson visit. So
Well,
Mike, I gladly put my writing on the shelf that day, and I leaned into some fellowship with Sam, and we talked about Man in Red Bandana. It was great.
Sam's a great guy. He also has done DIT for you, I believe, and which is a very vital part of filmmaking. And I'll always remember Sam, who used the term probably for the first time that I ever heard it of sycophant. So I always think of Sam as using the term sycophant, which it was very appropriate at the time.
In
So I
which
always
a
give
sycophant's basically, for those watching, listening that don't know, that's just like a crazy fan, right? Like a sick fan, someone who's like
like a
obsessed.
hanger on, a
Yeah,
barnacle.
a person who's obsessed. Yeah, Sam's a very, very smart guy, and it was really fun to chat with him. We're checking in here. We got Stephen E. watching the show with us
Very
as
good,
always. What's up,
Stephen
Stephen?
Edwards.
And I don't mean to answer. I don't mean to answer for Mike, but that looks like a Rocky poster to me right there. Now,
Yeah,
here's the question. Can you answer which Rocky poster is that? I believe that's from Rocky 4 when he has defeated Ivan Drago. So,
yeah, I think so.
all right. All right,
I
back
can
on
change and you can
back
change.
on task here. We see the American flag draped over Rocky Balboa's body. Reminds me of the time back in September and into October, November of 2001, right after the great tragedies of 9/11. I remember the American flag was something that we saw a lot of during that time. I remember it was a time of it was a great time of patriotism, and it was a time when Americans kind of stepped up and kind of showed a little bit of unity during what was a very frightening and scary time. It's funny, before we get into the film itself, I think we should just spend a couple minutes chatting about 9/11. It's kind of funny as time marches on. I assume that everybody was alive during 9/11, because I was in high
Right.
school. 9/11 to me has become the where were you when JFK was assassinated of our era. As a kid
Yeah.
growing up, I remember there was this constant conversation that you would hear throughout grown-ups, adults as a kid. And often that was kind of something that would come up. Like they can all the adults, the boomers, if you will, they can all remember where they were when Kennedy was assassinated. A lot of people got sent home from school. A lot of people were, at work, whatever. And it's one of those defining times in American history when you know exactly where you were and you remember it. So for me, Mike, I remember being in anthropology class. The first plane had struck the first tower, and there was so much commotion that my teacher at the time was a pretty tech savvy guy. He rolled the TV right in the room. We hooked it up, and sure enough, I unfortunately had to watch the second plane hit live right on television. As we were watching the coverage, they cut to another camera, and boom, there it is. So that was definitely an incredible day. I remember being that age, 16, 17 years old, whatever it was. You know damn well the seriousness of what's going on. And I think that, it's kind of interesting to think now that there's a whole generation. Here we are, a good 20 plus years later. There's a whole generation of adults that are alive roaming the earth that weren't born when 9/11 took place. Um, And it's one of those things where, I'm a historian. I feel as though it's important for us to speak on history, remember history, all that bullshit we've all heard a million times before. Those that don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. Um, so I'm a big believer in studying all that. And I think that films like Man in Red Bandana are very important because we have such a short memory in life,
Right.
and something as tragic and as impactful as 9/11, I don't wanna say anybody forgot it because that's not fair to say, and I can't speak for everybody. But, that's literally the slogan, that's the war cry, "Never forget," 9/11, and that's kind of, where it comes from, and movies like this help help remind people of not only what a tragic event and what a dark day in American history that was, but it's important to there's that great quote, and I'll have to look it up. Forgive me for not knowing it. It might be a Mister Rogers quote. I got to find it out. But, during a tragic event, you look at all the helpers, look at all the people that came to help. Like, yes, there's awful people that do awful things and these horrible events take place. But in the eyes of all that tragedy, there's almost always going to be people who help and who put themselves out there to do the right thing. And this whole movie is about one of those people, and that person's Wells Remy Crowther, who I think can inspire us all. We're checking in real quick. We've got Anna Gick. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. 9/11 most certainly did change the world. Mike, where were you on 9/11? What was your 9/11 experience like?
I wasn't. I was living pretty close to where you live now. I was living in the Silver Lake area, which is kind of at the trifecta of Cranston, Providence, and Johnston. And I basically woke up that day. I guess I was in my stay up all night, wake up early, wake up late phase of life, and put on the TV, and things were already in the middle of happening. But I remember just the shock and just the dominance of that story for the next several months, really, and just I remember the movies that I saw in the days after. Just to get some escape from the coverage on television. Went to see The Others with Nicole Kidman. The night of 9/11, I ended up at a restaurant called Cecilia's on Federal Hill with a good friend of mine at the time, Adam Friedman, and we're just sitting there eating our little mini pizzas and thinking, hey, this might be our last meal. Who knows what's going to happen next? Because if you think about it, Rhode Island's only what, a 3-hour drive from New York City. So there was also some rumors at the time, or some theories anyway, that perhaps these terrorists were going to strike again. And if they were going to strike again, they might not go for another big city like Los Angeles or New York. They might go for a mid-sized city like Providence or something like that. So there was fear, very real fear uh, for everybody. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to hit. And just kind of living in apprehension and anxiety. And talk radio was dominated by it. Everything was dominated by it for several weeks. And I can't think of the next major life event, maybe the Super Bowl, when the ironically enough, the Patriots won their first Super Bowl after that. But it was just a crazy, horrible time in some ways. Maybe it brought the country together for a short period. There was a wave of patriotism that maybe lasted a year and a half. But then we all kind of went back to, not to say normal, but the new normal anyway.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. It was definitely one of those moments when every headline, every channel was dominated by the story, and how could it not be? I mean, nothing like that has ever happened in the history of our society, the history of our nation. So moving on to the film itself, I'm going to read our IMDb summary of the film, just so that everybody who's at home and hasn't checked it out can know a little bit about what we're talking about before we get into it. And like Mike said, this movie's out there. It's on Amazon Prime. It's streaming free, correct, Mike? You can watch it for
I
free.
watched it I have Amazon Prime Video, part of the Amazon Prime subscription. So you can watch it free with commercials if you want to pay a few bucks, which probably helps the filmmaker. You can pay a few bucks and watch it commercial free if you like.
Okay, so there you have it. You can check it out on Amazon. Uh, this is a documentary film that depicts an inspirational story of a true American hero, Wells Remy Crowther, who died selflessly on that chilling September 11th day, guiding strangers from the 104th floor of the World Trade Center in the South Tower to safety. 8 months after his tragic death, his events were uncovered as a result of one ordinary item, a red bandana. The story gives me chills, and I'm kind of having all these emotions again just reading that kind of little blurb about the film. Um, so, like that blurb said, what's so incredible about this, and I'm going to summarize what Wells did, and I'm going to do the best that I can. Please watch the movie. Forgive me if I miss anything. Matthew Weiss, the director, if you're watching, forgive me if I leave any details out. But really, what Wells did that day is something special. Here was a 24-year-old, really a young stud, guy who just kind of had it all going on. Handsome guy, Division I college athlete, played lacrosse for the Boston College Eagles. Um, was the kind of guy who stood up against bullies and always was there to help the skinny geeky kid. He was kind of just like an all-American guy out of a comic book. And he had been working at a finance company up on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. Uh, Wells, like his father, was always very, very interested in firefighting. Being a firefighter is one of those professions that's often kind of passed down from generation to generation. So Wells, like his father, was a volunteer firefighter and excelled at that and was really excited about that. But of course, went to college in finance, and that's what he wanted to do. But I still think he, at the time, was sharing some time at the fire department and still acting as a volunteer.
Yeah,
Um,
I can jump in on that real quick, Tommy. What his dad says in the doc is that Wells had talked to his father and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm thinking about giving up this financial career." And his dad said, "What are you talking about? You're crazy. You're crazy. A young guy like you making all that money." And he said, "Dad, it's not just about money.
that's right.
Uh, I'm thinking about being a firefighter. And then after the whole, 9/11 happened, his father was going through Wells's stuff in Wells's home, and he discovered that Wells had filled out an application. He said between one half and two-thirds an application to be a New York City firefighter. I'm not sure if he had been doing volunteer firefighting. He might have been, but he was applying to be like a full-time, full-on, down and dirty, save people, let's roll fireman in New York City. He was
Yeah,
really,
I know that
you know,
he was working with the Nyack Fire Department, which is his hometown, so I do think he had a position there, but yeah, I remember that now. It's again, it's so funny, this stuff, you work on these movies and you get so close with them and they spend so much time in your hard drive, on your mental
yeah,
hard drive, and then over time, these little details, they kinda slip away, so that's why it's great to have shows like this and kinda think back on this. So yeah, Wells actually had a great high-paying job working in the city and decided to actually fill out that paperwork, and he was gonna probably leave that job. I mean, we don't know for a fact, but he was probably gonna leave that job and go be a civil servant. So back to the story, Wells is this kind of really, like I said, just young stud making his way through the world of finance. All of his supervisors said that he was kind of like alert, hot to trot. Really, they saw kind of great things in the future for Wells. And then, of course, that that incredibly tragic event took place, and there was basically a line of sort of like a point of no return, if you will, where above a certain mark in the building, most of the stairwells had been severed, meaning you really were kinda stuck up there. Like, if you were above a certain point in the building, for the most part, there was really no way to get down, and you were just kinda trapped up there, and it was really awful. Um, the power, as you can imagine, went out. They heard horrible screams, explosions, incredible amounts of chaos, fires burning, the heat literally rising, and Wells kind of quickly snapped into his firefighting training. Wells just quickly became a firefighter, and kind of a adorable and now, at the end of the day, iconic moment. Wells always carried around a red handkerchief. That was his thing. His father had a blue one, and he had a red one, and that's kinda how they always kinda separated themselves, and he would use it just kinda to blow his nose or to wipe his sweat off his brow. When he played lacrosse, he used it as a headband. He always wore the red bandana in his pocket. When he was working the finance floor, he'd have that red bandana in his pocket. So Wells immediately, when the fires hit and the smoke is coming everywhere, he used his training and he knew, I can't be breathing this smoke in right away. So he wrapped that red bandana around his face, and he used it to kind of filter all that smoke from coming in his lungs. So he wrapped that bandana around his face. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and he went to work, really just rounding up anyone that was able to move, anyone that was conscious, anyone that he could. And some of these people were injured, but still able to kind of move. And he basically led a charge of several groups of people to find a hidden staircase that nobody had really quite discovered through all the chaos and commotion. And he unearthed this staircase that they could basically get down to the lower levels and eventually 100 something floors down out the building to fresh air, to safety down on the street level. So Wells gathered this group of people, shepherded them down the stairs. When they said they couldn't, he was motivational and inspirational. He told them that no, they have to. He physically picked them up when he had to and helped them down the stairs. Led this group down. He can see the street. He can see the fresh air. He can see the outside. And you know what he does? He goes back up the stairs for more people. And he climbs those stairs all the way back up, and he does it all over again. He's searching through the fire blazing, through the infrastructure of the building literally crumbling all around him. And he finds more people and he brings those people downstairs. And I wanna say he did this several times. He led several parties, more than 1, a couple, 2, 3 parties of people. Again, you'll have to watch the documentary, and I don't even wanna begin to speculate and mess up the numbers, but I wanna say it's in the neighborhood of a dozen or so people in various small groups that he was able to guide out of that building and save their lives. And then finally, it's sad to say, I'm getting even a little emotional thinking about it, but there was that one last trip up the stairs where, Wells got down there. He saw the outside after several times up and down, guiding these people, and he very well could have left, knowing that he saved probably a dozen people. I mean, any other person on the planet would say, you know what, I did my thing. I saved plenty
Right.
of people. Now it's time to save my own skin, but not Wells. Wells, being the true firefighter at heart, grabbed that fire extinguisher and headed back up the stairs to help more people. And unfortunately, he just didn't make it out. That's when the building collapsed on him, uh, and he was pretty much missing for a while. Now, here's what's so amazing about the story. If that wasn't amazing enough, the fact that he saved all these people, it's the fact that really nobody knew that he was this hero for a while.
Right.
This is the amazing part of the doc, and again, we're gonna talk about Matthew, Weiss, the director, but Matthew did a terrific job kind of unearthing this part of the story because this documentary actually becomes a bit of a mystery story. It becomes a bit of a detective story, not fighting a crime, but putting together almost like a private investigator putting together clues. Because keep in mind, you had all these people, roughly a dozen people will say, they didn't know who Wells was. They just know that some strange mystery man, some mysterious hero saved them, and the only thing that they all pieced together, the only one clue that they could all say as a collective, consistent clue, is that the man that saved them was wearing a red bandana. And that's the only, because remember, his face was covered, there's smoke everywhere, the power went out, it's dark, there's fires blazing. Nobody really got a good look at him.
Right.
They just remember the man in the red bandana. And again, you're gonna watch the film, you're gonna check it out on Amazon Prime. And it wasn't until months later when Wells's mother, who basically read every single article, watched every story. Because remember, here's this poor woman who's mourning the loss of her son,
Right.
and she has no idea what happened to him. She really has no clue what an incredible hero her son really is and all the people that he saved. So she starts piecing together these stories, and there was this one very definitive article that came out, I believe in Mike, do you remember? It might have been the New York Times.
It was the New York Times or New York Post, one of the big ones. I think it was the Times.
Yeah, and basically, Allison Crowther, Wells's mother, is reading the paper one day, and this big article in the Times was sort of like they got together. It was one of the most comprehensive articles ever written about the event, where they interviewed several survivors and uh, it almost did like a minute by minute breakdown of the events of that day. And Allison Crowther, Wells's mother, read this one section where it basically says that a man in a red bandana saved her. Uh, and the hairs stood up on her arm because she knew that that had to be her son. She just knew
Right.
it. You know, that was his building, that was his floor, the man in red bandana. She knew about the bandana. And she just starts piecing this story together and starts really becoming a private investigator to put together the pieces and eventually learn that her son is this incredible hero that saved so many people. And the documentary gets into Allison and her husband Jefferson, who her husband at the time, Jefferson, who they basically learn these incredible things about their son. So, Mike, you saw the film. What was your kind of take home after watching it?
Well, good summary of the events, Tommy. So many takes from it. I mean, one thing you talk about the parents, and of course, they're kind of guiding us through Wells's history. And there's a photograph of young Wells, maybe 10 or 12 years old, and he's got his red bandana. And And just the father telling the story of, the father, Jefferson, always had his blue bandana, and they were about to go out one day, and a young Wells, maybe 6 or 7 years old, says, "Hey, Dad, can I have a handkerchief or a bandana like yours?" And his father said, "Of course." So his father goes, and the dad happened to have a red one, and so kind of in that moment, without realizing everything that would unfold in the next, 15 years or so, the father takes the red bandana. I think he took two, gave them to his son, and said, "This one's for show, and this one's for blow," meaning blow your nose. So one's a practical use, and one's a showmanship. And so I think Wells took that to heart. Sometimes if he was wearing a tuxedo or a suit, he'd use the red bandana, or handkerchief. They kind of use both terms as a showmanship thing, and the practical use of it too when he was playing sports and everything. That was very interesting to me. Just the love of the father and the son. It seemed like a special bond between them that you don't always see with fathers and sons, unfortunately. The other thing I took from it, Tommy, was the different way the two parents kind of dealt with this and reacted to it. The mom had a mother's instinct that her son was, unfortunately killed right away. She said she always felt that he did not survive. She just felt it in her gut. You can call it mom's intuition, women's intuition. Um, the father was holding out for hope. You can understand that perspective as well, because who knows what's going to happen. So the father was kind of holding out for hope. Unfortunately, in the days to come, they would find some remains of Wells, and but just when they're talking about having to have they already had a memorial service for Wells, and having to have a service without a body or any remains, it's tough. And the mom says it feels like a betrayal to the loved one. So I mean, you compare that type of stuff to a couple of years ago, New York City, you're seeing ambulances, taking out bodies after bodies from COVID. And it's just like, yeah, in these crazy situations, off the grid situations like 9/11, like COVID, when there's so many people that die in one place at one time, some of our traditional ritualistic ceremonial tributes to honor the dead have to be sacrificed. And we don't really talk about as much as we should about the emotional repercussions of that for people. Wells's sister stands out to me. I'm drawing a blank if he had one sister or two, but the one that was the athlete spoke very highly of Wells, how supportive he was of her sports. He was always like someone who was more proud of other people's accomplishments than his own. He was always like kind of someone who was humble because he was doing great things with his life, but he was more impressed or more proud of his sister's accomplishments or other friends. So it
Yeah,
just seemed like
like I said, he really the guy was almost, like, unrealistically created in a laboratory to be, like, just an all-around great like I said, the all-American guy, like, someone that you would if, you'd want him to be your best friend, you'd want your daughter to marry the guy. I mean, he's got all those qualities where you would just wanna get behind this person, and right up until his final act in his life, just a person who exuded good, and honor. And by the way, he did have two sisters. That's Honor. Speaking of Honor, Honor and Paige are his two sisters. And yes, you're right. They did speak very highly of him. And I remember the interview with his sister sticking out quite a bit. Real quick, let's check down with our and action homies here. We've got Nerdy Dude. What's up, Nerdy
I think
Dude?
that's a new viewer. So thanks
Welcome,
for nerd
welcome
dude
to joining
tuning
in,
in.
Nerdy Dude. It's wonderful to have you here, and of
I
course we
think
have Kim Kaling is with us. Kim is always
yes.
down for the end action cause. And Stephen E had shared with us earlier. He said, "I was walking towards the school, and everyone was walking away from the school. I knew something was wrong in that moment." Yeah, it was really like, again, people have said this before, but 9/11 was truly like out of a movie. It's like something that you see in a one of these disaster movies. It was an incredible thing. And Stephen E says, and let's not forget the Pentagon either. Yes, definitely. There was it was a day of pure commotion and craziness and unrest, and you just didn't know what the fuck was going to happen next. And it got crazier and crazier. So Here's the wild thing. Speaking of crazy, I think what was so crazy about Wells's story and what kind of hit me the most when I heard about it was nobody really knew about it. You know, there really wasn't a lot of press on this story. There wasn't a lot of heat on it. There wasn't a lot of awareness. And you know, we hear so many tragic, depressing, horrible stories from that day. Uh, and I'm not taking anything away from that. I think it's important for people to grieve and to tell and share their stories, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. But I also think it's important to uh, have a little bit of positivity shine down even in the darkest moments. And I think that that's what Wells can provide and what the story provides. So let's take it back to Matthew Weiss, the director, producer, writer of this film, who was having lunch with his longtime financial advisor, Jefferson Crowther, Wells's father. Uh, and Matt didn't know, you know, Matt had been working with this gentleman for a long time, you know, just as a his financial advisor, just doing business with him, and he didn't know about this story until they had lunch one day, and Jefferson shared the story with him, and Matt was just kind of astonished by it. You know, he almost couldn't believe it. He said, "This is the most incredible story I've ever heard in my life." And kind of right away, I don't want to speak for Matt, but you know, from the conversations that we've had, and I've had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with Matt, and when we were working on the movie and putting the movie out and doing a lot of press. So Matt kind of tells a story that like he kind of immediately was like, "Wow, this needs to be a movie." And like, why isn't this a movie? And why isn't this a documentary? Like more people. He said right away he knew that more people need to know about this story. You know, he needed to find a way to build awareness for this story. So Matthew Weiss was not a filmmaker by trade. You know, he's got a cool quote where he said, you know, stories often find filmmakers. In this case, filmmakers often find. So I already botched up Matt's quote.
Okay,
Let
buddy.
me try that again. Uh, Filmmakers often find stories. In this case, a story found a filmmaker,
Right.
because Matt had never made a movie before. He just knew that, like, all right, I got to figure this out. So Matt shot some interviews. Matt did a ton of research. He gathered up a lot of, um, obviously, archival footage of Wells, archival footage of the actual tragic events, and he put together a cut of a film. You know, basically a director's cut of a movie. Um, Cut to, as we say in the movie business, a little bit down the road. I'm working with Chad Verdi here in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. And Sam and I are very close at the time. Sam Eilertson, who I mentioned earlier, we were working on a lot of projects together and working with Chad on a lot of things. And Chad got in touch with Matthew Weiss and basically said, "Guys, watch this movie. You know, let me know what you think." And it was a very rough kind of director's cut of the film. And Sam and I watched it and we're kind of like eye open city. You know, we were like, whoa, this is a crazy story. This is like, like nothing we ever heard of before.
Right.
The kind of story that stops you in your tracks. And I feel like this phrase is used a lot in the movie business and often overused, but it was one of those like immediately you're like, I think you got something here. You
Right.
know, we got something that we can not only tell a compelling story, but frankly entertain people. Again, you know, like at the end of the day, documentaries are there to entertain you. You know, they're there to provide information. And I'm not saying that there's anything entertaining about this story. But there's something incredibly interesting about it, which
Engaging is probably a better word.
yeah,
Engaging,
yeah,
enlightening,
it's
inspirational.
very
Those are
engaging, very
yeah,
engaging, and one of those things that, um, if you're looking for a film that makes you feel something,
right.
this one certainly makes you feel feelings, and sometimes, you know, as humans, we like to feel things. We like to feel
Sure.
sadness. We wanna feel sorrow, and we wanna feel all these various ranges of emotions, and this movie certainly, you kind of run the gamut because there's some light moments in there too, you know, like you had even mentioned it, Mike, you know, some of the moments when uh Wells's family are talking about him as a kid and some of the fun things that he did. You know, it's not all sadness, and you know, there is some levity to the film. Um
You could say it's a
but yeah,
celebration of the guy's life, the celebration of the guy's spirit, a celebration of his life. He probably got more out of his 24 years than many people do out of 60 or 70 or 80 or 90. So, you know, he did live life to its fullest from all things that we can see.
yeah, that's a fact, Mike. And I mean, if you think of all the lives that he saved and the experiences that he was able to give them, you know, if you think about it, and not only them, again, I wish I had the exact number, and to be frank, I don't know that anyone truly knows the exact number,
I think,
because there are some people that haven't come forward about it, and you just
right.
don't know, like, who you don't really truly know what happened on that day, you know, in terms of there was so much chaos.
There's
Uh,
there's 12 people on record that he directly saved, and you're right. There might have been 20 or 30 more that never came forward or couldn't remember the red
couldn't
bandana,
remember.
or maybe they had some residual medical issues that they couldn't piece the story together of how they got out. They just know that they did somehow. So at least 12 people, and most likely more.
So think about it. Think about all of the experiences that Wells, in a way, gifted to not only those 12 people, but all their families. You know, it's like
Right.
this giant web that kind of gets
Butterfly
cast
effect.
out of all these moments that Wells created in a way by saving those people.
Hmm.
So it's a pretty incredible thing that he did. It's beyond pretty incredible. It's wildly incredible, and the story will really get you fired up. But I want to talk a little bit. I want to stay on track and kind of just talk about the production aspects. So the director Matthew Weiss had this really terrific but rough director's cut in place, um, and it was my job and Sam's job. We were brought on by Chad Verdi to basically get it ready for prime time. You know, as they say, you know, really um, reimagine the story in some ways, just in terms of how the events are told. You know, I think that with a documentary film, and documentaries are really an incredible topic, and I want to do a whole show on just documentary filmmaking down the road because it really is its own science, it's its own art form. And frankly, this was my first documentary. So I was learning how to kind of flex some different muscles in terms of how to tell a story. And this is going back, you know, this is probably around 2015 when this project came across our desk, so to speak. And not to go on a side note here, but you can remember about 7, 8 years ago, that's right around when these documentaries and these docu-series on Netflix and on all these various streaming platforms were becoming really fucking popular. You know, I remember like when I was a kid, late 90s, the idea of watching a documentary series, nobody wanted to fucking do that. Nobody gave a fuck about documentary series in the 90s.
Right.
It wasn't really a thing. I mean,
You had one
if you
Michael. Yeah, well, you had one Michael Moore movie in the theaters every 2 years, and that was about it.
yeah, and that was it. And even the Michael Moore movies were kind of like a heightened sense of cinema. They were almost like he kind of shot them like they were almost features anyway.
He has
Um,
an agenda when he makes his docs. They're very entertaining, but he goes into a documentary with an agenda, with a point to prove, and he usually proves it. So he's not really a documentary in the strictest sense of just capturing what happens and letting the audience judge for themselves.
yeah, and even just, you know, basically the point is I this was a very timely project because this project came out right around when people were starting to really get turned on by documentary series, the mini-series process. Watching a, you know, four-part documentary got people really fired up, and it still does. I mean, these documentaries are still cranking and rocking and rolling, and we're gonna talk about that later when we talk about the legacy of kind of what this movie did for me as a filmmaker. But basically here we are. Sam and I are brought on to basically polish this project up a little bit. Um, and some of the things that we did, it's kind of funny. Sam and I were talking yesterday. When you're trying to take your documentary and maybe level it up, polish it, get it to the point where distributors are going to say, yes, I want that. I would like to buy your movie, or I would like to distribute your movie, or let's be partners, whatever it is. One of the things that Sam and I did is almost like a cold case murder, like investigators in a cold case. We went back to the original interviews. And I remember we watched the raw footage of all the interviews, and Matt got a lot of really terrific interview footage with, people that were right in the thick of this whole chaos, all this chaos. So we went back and we watched the entire documentaries. We watched the entire interview footage, and we were able to find these little moments that weren't quite in there, that almost humanized the characters a little bit. And I wish we did this more. And you learn as time goes on. But you'll notice they do this a lot in documentaries where you kind of just like, as a filmmaker, that it's like raw footage, and it's just like a moment of them existing, but you get to kind of see it. So we did a little bit of that. We did a little bit of just like pulling actual sound bites that we thought would be more effective. I remember we brought on a person to do some graphics, and we wanted to kind of show a bit of a more graphic depiction of what Wells actually did in terms of going up and down, to kind of get the audience to realize, again, if you're making documentary film, you you want to have more than just talking heads. Nobody wants to watch. I don't care how compelling the subject matter is. Very few people are going to stay engaged by watching just a talking head. And Mike, what's a talking head?
That's basically when you just have the camera on someone speaking. You could say that what we're doing now is kind of talking heads because it's just you and I talking, but this is a broadcast slash podcast. This is not a
And we're not
documentary
charging
film.
any money for it. It's free.
Exactly. But in the world of cinema, if you're paying good money or spending good time to watch a movie, just having different people with interviews is flat. It's not visually engaging. And unless the story is so great and the storyteller is so great, 99% of the audience, 99% of the time are going to click off a strictly talking head documentary.
Yeah, so that was our biggest contribution, just finding ways to make it less about, these interviews were so great and so compelling, but like Mike said, you don't want people to get bored with them, and you don't want people to have a reason to change the channel. So we just tried to pump as much visuals as we could, everything from graphics to seeing whatever footage that we could dig up. We found some really great stock footage of President Obama actually doing a tribute to Wells at the 9/11 memorial. So we just tried to get it chock full of as much footage as possible. Matt was able to get a lot of really great footage as for like the wrap up, in terms of like the legacy that Wells has kind of carried out. There have been a number of babies that have been named Wells after Wells. There have been a number of scholarships that have been kind of put together in Wells's name. Boston College to this day, I believe, has a Man in Red Bandana night where during one of their, I believe during the lacrosse games, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do it during the football game too. I'm pretty sure they do it during their one of their big football games in September. They'll have Red Bandana night where everybody in the stands flashes that red bandana in honor of Wells. So it's pretty incredible to see the legacy that he's left. But back to a production standpoint, really what we did was just kind of, I hate to use the word clean it up because there's a lot more to it than that, but really just like uh, you know, get it ready for distribution, get it to the point where it could compete with a lot of projects that, it would be up against. And what we did, another thing was we brought in a composer by the name of David Bateman, who you're going to hear me talk about a lot, as we get, closer to some of the films that I've made in the last few years. This was one of the first movies that I worked on with David Bateman. I don't think it was our first movie together, but David Bateman put together an amazing score for this movie that like really gets you fired up and kind of encapsulates the vibe, for lack of a better word. So This is a very inspiring story, and if you have an inspiring story, well, god damn it, you better have some inspiring music, and, we definitely had that with David Bateman. Again, it's the kind of music that gets you fired up. Wells's story gets you fired up, it's one of those things where, to this day, I've seen the movie, probably 1,000 times, but to this day, when I watch that movie and I think of what Wells did, and I think of some of the bullshit that I complain about in my own life, and I say to myself, Jesus, man, like, sometimes people ask us to do favors and we might not want to help out our fellow man. We might not want to go the extra mile. And we're like, oh man, what the fuck does this guy want from me now? Like, what?
Right.
All right, I guess I could write this email, or I guess I could send this link to this video. Whatever little minutia that people bug each other with for help. And you think about a guy like Wells who was willing to give the ultimate form of help to perfect strangers that he didn't even know, just because he wanted to do what was right and because he knew that he was capable of helping, and god damn it, that's what he was going to do, and he was committed to do it. So again, I'm not saying that this movie is going to make you go out and become a volunteer fire department and become a volunteer firefighter, but I think this movie will make you rethink what you're willing to do to help your proverbial neighbor out, to help the person out to your left or to your right. Um, I actually, I said left and pointed right, and I said right and pointed left, but
It
you
might
get
be the
the
flippiness of our StreamYard might be flipping you. Also, Tommy, we should note, I think it's important to note that he was named an honorary New York City fireman, in his post life. I'm not sure.
posthumously, posthumously.
Posthumously, yeah, posthumously. Thank you. So he was named an honorary New York City fireman to the extent that there's some in New York City. You can help me out here with the details, but there's some type of place where those New York City
Yes,
firemen.
Mike, I believe what you're referring to is, there is a very I believe it's in, again, forgive us if we're butchering the details, but in one of the main precincts or one of the main memorials that list all of the active, at the time, active New York City firefighters that perished on that day. Wells has his name engraved on that list with all the other firefighters, and he's the only at the non-member at the time. He was not a member of the New York City NYFD. We remember that, right? Everybody was walking around with hats and T-shirts that said, was it FDNY or NYFD? I can't remember
Yeah,
how,
right.
but
New
anyway,
York, right.
yeah, New York Fire Department, that was big, that was big at the time. So basically, Wells got the ultimate nod from the New York City Fire Department, basically accepting him as a brother, as one of their own for the act of heroism on that day.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of books about him. I believe his sister and his, I want to say his sister and his mom each did different books. One was a children's book, like a version of the story that's palatable for young kids to read, because it is a very serious topic. And there was, I believe, another book that the
Yeah,
the
and
sister and the
and
mom had something to do with.
yeah, one of those books features illustrations that was actually used in the film. Because again, back to, what we were saying here, we've got Stephen E. chiming in here, correct about Talking Heads. Film is a visual art. Film is a visual art. Stage theater is a performing art. So yeah, we actually used some of those illustrations in the film. Um, this movie also had something, uh, kind of a really cool element. The voiceover is done by none other than Gwyneth Paltrow,
Yeah,
and her voice is very kind of, it's not very heavy-handed, and I mean that in a good way. A lot of these docs have a element of firmness, for lack of a better word. I find that Gwyneth Paltrow's voiceover is calming in a way, in a film that is very jarring and frankly can give you upset belly, like that nervous belly feeling. where you're just uncomfortable. And I don't mean uncomfortable in a bad way. I mean uncomfortable because, frankly, there's some devastating things that take place in this film, and some really dark elements and ideas that you have to wrap your head around. That voiceover that Gwyneth Paltrow has provides a bit of a soothing metronome to kinda keep the audience at an even keel while having to listen to some really dark shit, for lack of a better phrase.
Good point. Yeah, very good point, Tommy. And it's a good choice because it would have been so easy to have hit up someone like Morgan Freeman or James Earl Jones or uh, whoever else, John Cena, people that do voiceovers that have a well recognized and well respected and well liked voice. But to go with a more feminine, softer voice might have made these difficult parts of the movie more soothing, as you said. Her voice soothes out some of the sadness and tragedy of the story, and she's also very well respected and well liked. I mean, most people, at least that I know, have favorable feelings on Gwyneth Paltrow. I'm sure there's some critics, but I've always enjoyed her work.
Yeah, and I think that what having that first off, big shout out to Matthew Weiss for making the decision to go with a female voiceover. I think that, you had mentioned there's certainly a lot of great father-son elements in this movie, but there's a lot of really great mother-son elements in this movie. And having to watch Alison Crowther, who really interviews well. I mean, she presents very well, for a woman who's gone through such sorrow. She's really able to kind of compartmentalize it in her own way and keep her for lack of a better phrasing, keep her shit together. Because I don't know that I would, and I give her credit for that. Like, I'd probably be a blubbering mess talking about this stuff, and she demonstrates such strength, when she speaks about it, and it's really incredible. So I see this as very much a mother-son story, and having the female voiceover of Gwyneth Paltrow kinda helps get that tone across a little bit, that motherly tone, and yeah, it's just it's a story about, the love of a family for this young man and discovering what happened to their loved one, and, again, you hate to compare people. You really do, like, this person's better than that person is better than this person, but what the fuck? Like, was there a better person out there than Wells Remy Crowther? I mean, I'm fanboying over the guy. Like I
Yeah.
said, I've said it many times, like, this person was so good, it's like a human being that was created in a laboratory, and it's really just something else that, I think that's what we can be inspired by, like, nobody's perfect, but god damn it, Wells Remy Crowther was pretty fucking close to it, and I think he aspired to, I don't think it was by accident. I think he worked hard to kind of present that image of himself, and I think he had a lot of self-pride, and, that's an important thing that I don't wanna say that not enough kids these days have, but how mature was this guy at 24
Right.
years old? I mean, the maturity of this man at 24 years old was off the fucking charts. So really just an inspiring guy. I mean, if there's a team captain of life, Wells is like the team captain. That's the guy that if humanity had a team captain, Wells Crowther would have the C right on his shirt.
Well, it also makes you think, Tommy, at least it did for me. And this is really just maybe subtext, or maybe I was reading into the doc more than some people would. But you think I thought about things like predestiny or predestination or destiny, because just seeing the images of young Wells with the bandana and just the pictures of him, and he was so into this bandana, and as a tribute to his dad, but it became his own thing too. And then when his life reaches its final day, he's got the red bandana as always, and it helps him. This just the simple bandana, like you very well explained, covering his mouth so he could do this, covering his nose and mouth. I'm assuming so he could breathe better to help these people. It's like, how can you not at least, even for the hardcore atheist out there, how can you at least not entertain the thought that there's some type of predestiny, destination, divine influence, whatever you want to call it? But how can you not at least examine the possibility of such when this guy's whole life was kind of leading up to this moment where he still had to be heroic? It was no accident, it was an act of heroism. But it seems to me that there was more than just, you know, the 9 to 5 wake up and you have your ham and eggs for breakfast type of stuff here. There's some extracurricular phenomenon as well. At least that's what I thought of.
Well, Mike, that's an interesting take, and you're certainly entitled to that opinion. And hey, you know what? And I don't know, I wasn't there that day, and I could never begin to get inside of that man's head. But you almost have to wonder if Wells thought that way too on that day. Like, okay, this is it. This is why I was put on this planet. Now it's time to go to work. And
Yeah,
I think that kind of fight or flight ism or whatever you want to call it kicked in his head, where he said to himself, like, okay, everybody has their glorious day in the sun, and this is mine when I'm gonna kind of shine and do what I do best, and help my fellow man. So interesting take, Mike. As you're talking about this, as you're mentioning just the bandana and all these different what we call cinematic elements, I can't help but think that, or I should say, I can't help but discuss. There was some talk about this being a feature film, narrative film with actors and, the whole kit and caboodle. Of course, there's a lot to it. I'm not going to, as they say never. I'm not going to say that this will never be a feature film. I will say that this one has a lot of hurdles to get over. You're telling the story of an actual person, so of course you would need the rights of you need that person's life rights, you need their family's involvement, and they would have to be, on board with that. From a filmmaking standpoint, I mean, kind of depicting the events of 9/11 and the explosion and the fires and the crash. I mean, it would be quite the undertaking. So I think it's one of those things where this would require a pretty incredible budget. Uh, and also, I think you have to always wonder, and it's a fine line because, like I said, I think it's important to build an awareness. I think it's important to inspire and create engaging films. But I think there's always that little part of us in the back of our head that doesn't want to cash in on a tragedy, or at
sure.
least that's me.
Right.
One thing that's really cool about Matthew Weiss, and again, uh, this wasn't a money making venture for Matt. This wasn't about making a ton of money. He didn't care about that at all. Still to this day doesn't care about that. This movie was about accomplishing his original goal, which was to spread awareness and make sure that as many people know about Wells Remy Crowther as humanly possible. And Matthew certainly succeeded in that goal and making this movie and getting that word out there. So yeah, I think that ultimately, who knows? Never say never. Will this be a feature film someday? Only time will tell. Would it be a compelling story? Fuck yeah, it would. Would it be? Could I just picture some you know young actor on the come up in the trailer moment, taking that red bandana and placing it over his face? I mean, come on. If that's
If
not a
you had a,
fucking if that's not a fucking trailer moment, I don't know what is.
yeah,
Um,
right. Makes you think if you had like a Miles Teller 15 years ago, or the other thing that that would be a good choice. But it makes you think, Tommy. Some of these feature films that feature actors, or I'm sorry, characters that have a certain age, like for instance 24, for the Wells, not to say character, but to portray Wells at age 24 when this happened. How many years does it take of pre-production to get a movie like this going? You might have to start looking at 18, 19, 20-year-old actors, just knowing that it's going to take 3 or 4 or 5 years or
I love
whatever.
you. I love you, buddy, but I gotta disagree with that one. I think that a 30-year-old guy could play Wells Remy Crowther, no problem. I mean,
Okay.
actors are incredible chameleons. You'd be surprised. There's probably a 35-year-old actor out there right now who you put the right haircut on them, you get them to drop a couple lbs, they'll be looking 25 years old in no time. Maybe that's coming from the perspective of an aging actor, brother.
Well, we're all aging. It only goes in one direction. I mean, I just to lighten up the mood just a little bit. I saw Grease a few weeks ago on the big screen, and Olivia Newton-John's like 30. Travolta's the youngest one at 24. Rizzo is like 33. But in
And they're
any
all
event,
playing high school kids.
they're all playing high school kids and doing all types of sundry activities. But this movie, Man in Red Bandana, I'm glad we're talking about it. I'm glad we're trying to bring some attention to it. I was on your Facebook page today, Tommy, as you were sharing the information about this, and I think I saw Matthew Weiss, the director, even give a couple of thumbs up. So maybe he is watching, and he's welcome to share this link. And all the people watching us are welcome to copy and paste the URL, put a personal note, and share this broadcast because not only for our benefit, but for the benefit of this story. Man in Red Bandana available on Amazon Prime with commercials. There's probably other ways you can see it and enjoy the movie and get inspired by the story of Wells and what he did for all these people.
Absolutely, Mike, and we do appreciate it. Anyone out there watching, please do share this out there and give people the nod to this amazing thing that Wells did back on September 11th, 2001. And yes, a big shout out to Matthew Weiss. Matthew and I have worked together on several projects. This was a really kind of great kickoff, but Matt was a producer on Vault. We've worked together on, like I said, a lot of other documentaries. And this movie kind of set the tone, or I shouldn't say set the tone, but I should say set the table for what would be another handful of documentaries that I'd go on to work on. After this, it wasn't long after this, I ended up working again with Chad Verdi and Sam Eilertson, and we worked on the movie Tough Love, which was the documentary about Lennox Lewis. And then we went on to make Knockout Blonde, which yet to come out, but it's going to be playing at the Voices Rising Film Festival at the end of the month. And that's about Kelly Maloney. And we made a documentary we're just about to release later on in the winter of beginning of 2023, My Father, Muhammad Ali, all about Muhammad Ali's son. So in a way, I got to thank Matthew Weiss for kind of kicking off my documentary filmmaking career. So thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity to help out on this movie. I know Sam and I had a terrific time working on this. I know Chad Verdi, our producer, absolutely loves this movie. I know it's a tradition. He'll watch it every September. Um, and we're honored, to be honest with you. There are so many projects. My career, I've made movies about zombies. I've made movies about pigs that have the ability to fucking talk, okay? Talking pigs. Uh,
Arnie, was it Arnie the talking pig or
it doesn't matter. My point is I've made a
Squirrel the
lot of
talking pig?
crazy, ridiculous
Oh,
fucking movies that,
sure.
frankly, they're just there for sheer entertainment value. They don't really have any chutzpah whatsoever. There's no merit. Um, to be able to work on a project that is chock full of merit and honor and something that you could truly be proud of, that was a really nice experience. So that was my big takeaway on Man in Red Bandana. Let's talk a little bit about the legacy of this film. So this film was shown at the 2017 Rhode Island Film Festival, where it was the winner of the International Humanitarian Award. I remember that event was terrific. We had a blast. The film, for the most part, we did a lot of the post production in Rhode Island. So to be able to kind of have a little bit of a home field advantage and play it at the Rhode Island Film Festival meant a lot. Um, you know, it's one of those things where you work so closely with these people making a documentary, maybe a year or two goes by. Some people you don't even get to be in the same room with. So having a big screening or a big festival like that, where I could actually be in the same room with David Bateman and Matt Wise, our composer, our director, and like, oh, look, wow, producer Chad Verdi's there. We're all in the same room. It's kind of nice. So that was a nice chance to kind of celebrate that film. Um, but overall, you owe it to yourself to get inspired and go out and watch Men in Red Bandana. I think that you'll certainly feel some feelings from it, and I think that you might look at your fellow man a little differently. I don't know. That's just me.
I think you're right, Tommy. It's definitely an inspirational movie. And after the end credits, people should know don't turn the movie off right away because at the end of the film, I think after some of the credits, there's a little mini interview with director Matt and the parents, and they're sitting there like some type of film screening Q&A. And it's just about 5 or 6 minutes, so it's not a terrible obligation of your time. But just to see the principals involved, the filmmaker and the parents, um, after the movie's been kind of well received, it's kind of a nice thing to stick around and watch for that too.
Yes, please do watch the movie all the way to the end. Um, Next week, we are going to be diving into a topic that I think is almost like the one of the bigger mysteries in the art of filmmaking. It's one of those things that we know a lot about, we've heard a lot about, but we don't, I should say, we've heard a lot about it, but we don't necessarily know what it all entails. And that is the pre production process. Pre production, guys. We're talking about the 6 to 8 weeks of hard work that you have to put in before you go out and shoot your feature film. Now, listen, if you're watching this and you're saying, well, I don't make feature films, I just make short films, or I make YouTube videos, or I make documentaries, or I make music videos. Okay, you still need pre production. And you can still learn a lot from this episode on pre production because we're not just going to be talking about prep for a feature film. Yes, that'll be kind of like the main um, bouquet of the show, if you
Right.
will. But there will be some other little flowers in the bouquet that talk about how to prep a music video, how to prep a simple YouTube video that you want to do. We're talking
Here's
about
one.
prep, guys.
Here's one for you, Tommy. Fail to prepare, then prepare to fail.
Ooh, I like
Like
that.
that. Put that on a bumper sticker. I did want to say, Tommy, I think when you mentioned the Lennox Lewis, it actually the title got changed to Lennox Lewis: The Untold Story, if I'm not mistaken. That the tough love wasn't used in the final take of the. According to IMDb, it's called Lennox Lewis: The Untold Story,
Yeah, I
2020.
think that, in some markets it was tough love.
Hmm.
Still to this day, foreign perhaps. Um, but yeah, anyway, next week, check us out. We'll be talking all about pre-production. And if you haven't already, please, subscribe to the show. It's very important that we get them subscriptions up. So share, like, subscribe, tell your friends that are interested in movies, and we hope to join you every Tuesday. We'll be putting out new content. You can follow me at Tom DiNucci on Instagram. And if you're looking on Twitter, it's the same deal at Tom DiNucci. And of course, YouTube, type in your search Tom DiNucci right there. That's how it's spelled, DeNucci. Check
With
us
the
out.
big N. Yeah. And I'm always at subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. MikeMessier.com has all my social media links, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And you still need to help me with my Instagram game, buddy, because it's not my specialty. But we appreciate everyone who supports the show on a weekly basis. And some people actually make a destination viewing. Stephen E., Kim Kaling, and some others actually tune in every week. So we do appreciate that.
Yes, thank you, Kim. Thank you, Steven. And Nerdy Dude, we hope to see you next week too. Welcome to the show, brother. All right, guys, we'll see you next week when we're talking all about pre production on episode 21 of And Action. Later, guys.